So we're going to talk about line a little bit. Line is a formal element of design, and line has a lot of different functions in design. It can be used to divide space, separate content, or direct the flow of content. Or it can also be used to create emphasis. But the first thing I want you to really think about is how you create feeling with line, or how you create content with line. So if you look at these six little drawings, you notice that the upper left is vertical, black, alternate, even intervals. It's very static. And so what it might communicate is static, orderly, conservative. And I'm talking about these lines right here. The upper right, these are more uniform, horizontal, more widely spaced, but still very evenly spaced. So still communicating the idea of static, stable, orderly. Middle left here, there's a little bit more uneven spacing of otherwise uniform lines, and it kind of creates the impression of movement. You almost feel like these lines are kind of sliding up the space here. And then if you look at middle right, this example, there is almost the illusion of roundness. There's a progression. It feels like it's progressing from one side to the other. So it's more dynamic than these two versions up here. So I would say the middle versions are a little bit more dynamic. The upper versions are a little bit more static. And then if you look at lower left, you see that varying line widths and distances kind of create a sense of randomness. And these two examples might, or especially this example here, might communicate a little bit more chaos. It's a little bit more disorderly and random. And then lower right, there's uniform size and spacing of the lines, but the curvature of the line creates this sense of movement. So it's a little bit more dynamic, but orderly than the lower left. So you can communicate a lot by the way you place the lines, the spacing of the lines. And so I just want you to start to think about that. When you notice this line in design, really think about what the line is doing. Line can be used to describe flat shapes. And here you see that the line unifies the design because the entire piece is done in the same style. It's almost a really simple gestural style, but it's consistent, and it's creating sort of an environment or a sense of the space. Note how thick areas of marker to thin show dense areas of type or less type. So understanding lines really help you communicate a certain feeling or idea in your work and give you more control over the effect of your work. And it helps you target the message, and you can send out a desired message more effectively. So here's an example of a Velvet Crush album cover. So the lines are very gestural. You also see how the lines are communicating the sense of space. The lines of the boom box over here are very thin. It looks like this is in the distance in the space, whereas these are much more textured, bolder, thicker. It feels like this is right in front of you. So you can see how you can kind of mix qualities in lines to create illusion of depth, or also just to create different points of emphasis in the space. This was quickly done with a ballpoint pen for a fictional book on the psychology of canines. And gestural lines are really fun in the sense that they create this sense of movement, this energy. And so you can see that sometimes it's really appropriate to work gesturally and get that sense of kind of dynamic movement in the space. So there's basically unlimited variations of lines, and it's a basic element that can convey many different moods and feelings in art or design. Its basic goal is to describe shape. It helps recognize familiar objects. And it's a basic tool that every designer and artist uses. So this example is a beautiful illustration done in this gestural style and then hand tinted. And you can see how the level of detail in the wings And then these really beautiful kind of gestural lines in the bottom part of the drawing really communicate this idea. This was done for a book called A Trip to Yosemite, and it was these really simple gestural drawings of mountains that were then kind of tinted and placed on the pages, as well as the back and front cover. This was a photograph actually, but you can see that line is being communicated, and it's, you know, giving you that sense of the flow of traffic, the acceleration of the traffic. So it's really communicating that concept of speed, traffic, energy. Text can also function as lines. So you can see here, these are little lines of text, but they're also just lines within the space or the illustration. So sometimes when you're looking at type, look how it does function as line and how it adds to the graphic or adds to the meaning of the graphic in the way that it's placed and also in the font and the style with which it's rendered. So two really different examples. The top here, I would describe these shapes as very organic. Circular shapes or oval shapes have this sort of organic quality, whereas the shapes down here are very linear. The triangles are very precise, rectilinear, mathematical, more organized. And so you can kind of see these two qualities. Is it organic and kind of giving you the sense of nature, or is it very precise, methodical, geometric, and giving you that sense of control? There's a famous designer, and you will be studying him in this class. His name's Joseph Mueller Brockman, and he created basically the grid system in design, or he promoted the grid system in design. And in his book that he wrote about the grid system, he has these beautiful lines done with transparency on the front cover. And you can see how this kind of overlapping effect was really effective. So you can see these thin lines are evenly placed, but then there's also curved lines going through the space. So line, think about it. There's so many different ways that you can render and ways that you can communicate with line. You can, if you want to create emphasis, you can thicken parts of a line or a whole line in a graphic, or you can make certain lines darker, or you can actually change the style of certain lines within the graphic to create emphasis. So here's a great, just an ad for these art pens, and you can see the simplicity of it is they just showed you exactly the type of line that you might draw with each particular pen. And these are the pens that we're actually recommending for the class, and you can see that they're weighted, and the beauty of them is they allow you to draw these lines really precisely. So some lines you draw can be really thick and bold, and others can be really thin and delicate, and it's just easier for you if you have these series of pens to really control how thick and thin these lines are. We also have these in the lab for checkout if you want to check them out during lab time or open lab time. So you can see here just beautiful, delicate lines create the shape of the seashell. And, some lines are contour. They're used to make up forms and figures in drawing or describe the outlines in drawings. Others are more implied, and that might be a series of points or figures that the eye automatically connects and forms an imaginary line with. So, thinking about how you direct the gaze, the line of vision within the space is also important. Just some more examples. You can see that this was created doing a series of sort of kind of stacked lines, and then you're kind of controlling the space by changing the direction of the lines and creating the shapes of the figures. Line can be almost texture. A dot can be a line. So, many dots placed together can create a sense of texture or a sense of a line. Line, this is a great example of perspective, using line to create perspective. And this is one point perspective where all the lines are kind of pointing in this direction in the space, kind of leading our eye into the distance. Just kind of a quick gestural drawing. And you notice here, this is nice because they're really emphasizing certain areas of the drawing using this really bold, black, thick line to do that, to kind of draw us in and get contrast in the illustration. You see that there's a sense of intensity happening in the eyes and the nose and the mouth. It's really drawing us into that part of the face. Our eye will naturally go to someone's eyes and mouth when we're looking at a portrait, but to intensify it is to make us even more connected to it, or to make us look at it a little bit more intensely. And this is almost overdone. There's almost too much detail in this face. And what I would recommend is maybe lessen it in certain areas, because if you have too much intensity, it becomes sort of hard to look at or not as interesting. It's just a nice, simple drawing, and you can see that there's contrast here. The artist is letting some of the spaces just be completely flat or white. This is a Rembrandt of a woman sitting in bed, and you can see the area of emphasis here where the Rembrandt is really intensifying the area, darkening the lines, thickening the lines to create that emphasis. This was a series of posters and bus shelters designed for San Francisco performances that announced upcoming performances. And it was interesting. They used sort of these gestural lines with this kind of text almost stamped on top. So this is just a simple drawing, but you can see how objects in the real world, sometimes you can draw on top of them, or you can create this sense of space using them as reference. Okay, another, they're using an illustration to create this really simple line drawing. And I really do encourage you to use imagery for reference. If you're trying to create a series of lines, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can find something that you can put trace paper on top of, and then you can trace certain areas of it, and that can then be part of your design. And so in the course, you might be scanning elements and then vectorizing them and then manipulating those elements. So those are all things I encourage. So designers often use images for reference. Another example. And there's lines in nature, there's lines everywhere. So you can see that these curved lines, which follow this kind of shape of the tree, create the sense of volume. And, these are really beautiful, this just really beautiful texture that's occurring naturally in nature with these small lines kind of following the curve. So what you're gonna do this week is you're gonna create a line drawing from a photograph. So you've all been emailed a photograph of an old face. And you're going to put the picture down, and you're going to put a piece of trace paper on top of it. And then you're going to, at first, just draw all of the lines. And once you're done drawing all the lines, I want you to go back in and thicken and darken some of the lines to create emphasis. Don't focus too much on the shape. Really just focus on seeing the lines, drawing the lines, and then emphasizing certain lines. And if you have questions, feel free to email me. And you can come in and use the open lab time. I'm going to be establishing some open lab time for you guys to come in and get some extra help. So look at the assignment and then check your email, because that's where you'll be mailed the photograph. You'll have to print it out. You might need to get a piece of trace paper. If you come to see me during my office hours, I can give you a piece of trace paper to use for this project. But you're going to trace on top of it, and then you're going to create this line drawing based on a photo. So as we go forward, we'll be looking at the other principles, shape, value, color, texture, format. But this week, I really just want you to focus and concentrate on line.